Okay, everyone, welcome. We have here today another student educational session for the Student Climate Challenge. My name is Joanna Contarino. I'm a program assistant with Sustainable Jersey. And today we have a wonderful presentation on food waste. So really excited about that. And we'll introduce Sarah in just a moment. I just want to go over a few of the details of the challenge for those that have not heard of it before. Or are just hearing about it. So the challenge is hosted by Sustainable Jersey and the Drum Thwackett Foundation with generous support from Atlantic City Electric and Exelon. Here's a little bit of the details about how the challenge will go. So we have it open to all students in public schools in New Jersey, grades 6 to 12. And then we want to keep the teams of students from 2 to 12. And the students will be completing a project, guided by their teacher advisors, and it should be a school or community project that addresses the human causes of climate change or the impacts that climate change has on the environment. And in order to turn in a project, the project has to be in the form of a digital story video. And this will just go through, how they came up with the idea for the project, how they completed the project, showing the results and the connection to climate change. So if you're unsure of how to make a digital story video, we do have a tutorial up on our YouTube playlist that you can find at our bit.ly link that will be in the chat shortly. This slide right here just gives a rundown of the timeline. So we're kind of wrapping up our educational sessions. And we've had quite a few. We're really excited to, continue. And we hope that people can experience their recordings and help them, have them help in their projects. So April 1st is when the challenge submissions will be due. And May, we will announce the finalists. And then we will have an award ceremony in June at the Drum Thwackett House, and that will be hosted by Governor Phil Murphy and the First Lady Tammy Murphy. And as you can see down here at the bottom of the slide, we'll have grants awarded to the first, second, and third place winners, which are going to be used for, continuing the climate action project that you do for this challenge, or, more sustainability or climate action projects that you want to do on your campus. So thank you for listening to that. I'm going to pass it over to Sarah El-Nakib so we can talk about food waste.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joanne. I'm just going to share my screen and get started. So welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about food waste and how it's a problem and what you can do to help support the reduction of food waste. And so a little bit of the background that you might have read in the introduction is that in the United States, we waste about 30 to 40% of the food we grow. That is about 20 pounds per person per month. And that adds up. So altogether, we make about 80 billion pounds of food wasted each year. That's enough to fill the Empire State Building 1,000 times. And so it's a huge problem because of all of the waste that the resources that go into that food. And so there's a small distinction in the way we talk about food waste. And so food waste generally means that the food that is wasted at the consumer level or our level. So that's more at the restaurants, grocery stores, and at home. Whereas food loss is what happens before the food gets to us. So usually at the farm, in harvest, and in transportation. And so for this presentation, I'll be talking about food waste in general, but I just thought it was important to kind of make that distinction. And food waste and loss happens all throughout the food system. And so we see that most of the food that is wasted is some fruits and vegetables, as well as some seafood is wasted in production. So that's usually, at the farm or, in the oyster bays, things like that. And then in post-production and processing and distribution, we've done a really good job of keeping the food waste down, right? And so we have less than 10% for most part in those sectors for each food item. But then when you get to our level, at the consumer level, that's where most of the waste happens, right? And so you can see most of the waste is happening here at the consumer level. So what does that mean? That means if we had 100 apples, 20 of them will be wasted at the orchard, 3 of them will be wasted at post-harvest, 1 of them will be wasted during that packaging and processing, 12 of them will be wasted in the store, and 28 of them will be wasted in our refrigerators when we're not eating them. And so out of all the 100 apples that we've grown, we'll actually only have 36 apples left. And so that's a wild amount of waste, especially given all of the food insecurity and all of the people who need additional food in our communities. And waste doesn't only mean that it's, the wasted food itself. They have economic, environmental, and social impacts. And so one of the economic impacts of food waste is that it creates greenhouse gases. In fact, it creates a gas called methane, which is much more potent than carbon dioxide. And so a lot of times when you talk about climate change, we think about things like, reducing carbon emissions, through our cars, right? Trying to, use less, kind of gasoline and things like that. But food waste, if it was together globally, was its own country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and the United States. And so basically we have a lot of waste, a lot of energy and methane that's created from that food waste. Additionally, there's a huge economic impact. And so in the United States, we throw out, like I said, 30 to 40% of the food we grow, which means it's about, $161 to $218 billion in food waste. And that includes all of the, the cost of the transportation of that food, hauling costs, making that food, and so on. And finally, some of the social costs that I mentioned are, 10% of US population don't have enough food and don't know where their next meal is coming from. And so it's so important to think about how 13.7 million people in the United States don't have enough food, and yet we're throwing out so much, right? And so it doesn't make sense for us to have this problem. And so to help us solve this problem, the EPA created something called the food recovery hierarchy. And the food recovery hierarchy is really a way for us to think about how we want to reduce waste. And so, a lot of times when I talk to people about food waste, they want to talk about composting. And composting is great, but if you notice, it's all the way on the bottom, right next to landfill. And so that's because in composting, we get back a lot of the nutrients into the soil, but we lose all of the energy, right? The calories are burned off during the composting process. And so the EPA recommends that the first thing we can do to reduce waste is, source reduction. So only make as much as we need. And so this goes back to our cafeterias and how they make food. For us at home, maybe meal planning, not making too much food. But then if you can't, reduce it at the source, you want to feed hungry people. And so donating food to food banks and soup kitchens. And then if you can't do that, you want to feed animals. And so at Rutgers, we actually provide, a lot of our scraps from our dining halls to a pig farm in Pennsylvania. And then after that, if you can't do that, you can use it for industrial uses. So a lot of oils can be transformed into biofuels that can be used to instead of gasoline. And then finally, if you can't do that, you want to compost. And of course, the least favorite is to put it in a landfill. Unfortunately, in the United States today, we have an inverted version of this pyramid. And so we basically throw everything in a landfill. And if we do anything about food waste, we compost it. And so the idea here is really trying to use the most resources and making sure that we're providing the food waste to the people that need it. And so how does food waste, or why does food waste happen throughout the system, and what are some of the solutions? And so in production at the farm, food waste can happen because of a lot of different drivers. Things like the weather conditions, market conditions, sometimes buyer standards. And so if you look on the bottom of that slide, you can see like fruits and vegetables that look kind of funny, right? And so there's this new movement with the ugly food movement that's trying to show, hey, this is a perfectly good strawberry, this is a perfectly good eggplant, and you can still eat it. It just maybe doesn't meet like standards, and we shouldn't be wasting it. There might be things that are related to labor shortages. And so we live in New Jersey, and it's very expensive for farmers to kind of find people to help collect the produce. And so sometimes programs have like a gleaning program where you can go out to the farm and pick as much food as you want and donate it to a local food pantry, or actually kind of take it home. And so that's a way to reduce waste. Some potential solutions, like I said, were secondary markets for imperfect food, so that ugly food movement, improving kind of labor laws and farm worker labor, and really creating kind of regional food systems. For processing, oftentimes this is just created because we want to take out the unedible part of the food. And if you remember, this is the part where we had the least amount of food waste. Sometimes there's spoilage or malfunctions in the equipment. And so just developing better procedures in the factories, minimizing the waste, and kind of improving kind of trimming can really help reduce food waste. For distribution, taking food from one part of the country to the next, there's oftentimes issues with imperfect holding, right? So sometimes if we're getting our lettuce from Arizona and it's coming all the way to New Jersey, so to improve it and make sure it doesn't wilt, we keep it in refrigerated trucks. And so if that refrigerated truck stops being refrigerated at some point during that journey across the country, it can create a hazardous product and we can get sick. And so sometimes, they have to throw out food because of that. And so, proper training of handling and storing food is really important, and maybe establishing an online platform and marketplace for cases where shipments have been rejected. At the retail level, there's a lot of food waste. And so if you remember, we said most of the food waste happens at this level and at home, in school, right? And so this is basically where a lot of the food waste happens. And it really has to do with the way we display food. And so if you look at the picture, you see all those beautiful oranges and apples and avocados that are kind of in these pyramid shapes to show abundance and make things attractive for us. But unfortunately, because we do it this way, all of the bottom produce end up being bruised and unwanted. And so the grocers end up having to throw them out. And people don't understand date labels sometimes. And so they might not purchase something or throw something out, even though it's perfectly okay. And so really streamlining your inventory, redesigning your produce and seafood to make sure that there's less damage, and trying to increase some of that donation to food rescue organizations that we mentioned. And then in the food service sector, where we're talking about restaurants, schools, and cafeterias, you really want to think about portion size. And so I'm sure you all saw our portions have been getting bigger and bigger. I mean, not to mention any restaurant names, but I can't, certain restaurants I have to order and take half of it to go because it's so big. It's almost 2 meals, right? And so the idea is to really provide reduced menu options and flexibility with portions. And really provide some education for staff on how to make things to order and reduce and increase donations so that we can give back to the pantry. And then finally at home, a lot of times people just don't know about food waste. They think that, food waste is not a problem for them. And if they throw that one apple away or one orange, it's not making a big deal. But all that food waste adds up, right? And so we really want to make sure that we're thinking about how much we're wasting, and we're thinking about how we're storing food, how we're planning to use food, and not over purchasing or impulse buying. And so some of the solutions for how to reduce food waste at home, I will get into in a minute, but they include things like better preparation and meal planning, and maybe shopping strategies as well. So there have been a lot of rules around food waste reduction in the United States and in New Jersey, which has been very exciting, so that we can actually start moving the needle on reducing food waste. And so in 2015, the United States Department of Agriculture and the Environmental Protection Agency teamed up to create the first ever goal for the US to reduce food waste by half by 2030. So we're in 2022, that gives us 7 more years to meet that goal. And this goal is mirrored with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to reduce food waste by half as well by 2030. And in 2017, New Jersey adopted a similar law to reduce the municipal solid food waste from the municipal solid waste stream by half, again, by 2030. And so what are some of the things that you can do at home? And then what are some of the things that you can do in school? So I'm going to go through a few suggestions that I'm hoping you'll be able to consider when you're thinking about your project. So the first thing is you want to plan your shopping trips beforehand, right? Impulse buying can create a lot of waste. Don't go to the grocery store hungry. That's always a bad idea. And so you want to make sure that you check that you have what you have before you go. Going to the grocery store with a list and sticking to that list. Buying small portion amounts, especially of the things that expire quickly. So fruits, vegetables. So oftentimes, my daughter loves strawberries, and so if we buy the big batch of strawberries, by the time she gets to the other half, they're no good. And so we buy half frozen, half fresh, so that we can kind of keep her eating strawberries without them going bad, and we don't waste food. So always thinking about how to opt for frozen produce if possible. Prepare making sure that you have a proper storage of your refrigerator and cupboards. And so oftentimes you get that leftovers in the back of the fridge that you haven't seen in about a month, and now it looks like a science project, right? And so you want to make sure that you're constantly cleaning your fridge and having it clutter free so that you don't waste anything that you're not seeing. Also, sometimes we put food in the refrigerator and that we don't need to, and so it creates it might spoil faster because of a lack of proper storage. And so I'll talk about storage in a minute, but you want to make sure that you're separating items into small portions and freezing them if you're not going to use them right away. And I have a lot of resources for you to know like how long you should keep things in the fridge versus the freezer and so on. So I'll share some of those resources. And then finally, like I said, you want to make sure that your temperatures are correct and that you're not, kind of spoiling things by putting them in the wrong place. And so your refrigerator should be at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, and your freezer should always be at 0. And so for produce, sometimes we don't need to refrigerate them. So a lot of people know about bananas and apples that you shouldn't refrigerate them, but somehow tomatoes end up in the refrigerator for most people. And so you actually want to make sure that you don't refrigerate them, and you want to separate them because some fruit has emit ethylene gas, which helps ripen different other fruit faster. And so I'll be sharing this handout that shows which fruit or vegetables are ethylene gas emitters, and so they release that gas, and which ones are sensitive to it. And so it's really important to keep them separated. You can also use this to your advantage. So if you have, for example, tomatoes that you want to ripen faster, you can put a banana on top of them, a ripe banana, and the ethylene gas from the banana will actually ripen them a little bit faster. I always use this for avocado too, because avocado, when they get too hard, and then you could put them with an ethylene emitter to actually ripen them a little bit faster. And then another thing you need to know is about expiration dates. So oftentimes people think that sell by, use by, and best by dates are actually about food safety. But in fact, they're always sell by, use by, and best by dates are all food quality and not food safety indicators. The only food that they use for food safety is for baby formula. And so you can eat food that is past its sell by, use by, and best by dates. It just won't be the best quality food. And so you can take a look at a fact sheet that I will share with you at the end of this session to learn a little bit more about what each of them means and how to eat them safely. And then finally, the last thing you want to do at home is you want to make sure that you love your leftovers and you use them, right? And so making sure that you're freezing leftovers for the next meal, or sharing them with your neighbors and friends, donating any unopened, non-perishable foods to the food bank or food pantry, and encouraging your guests to take some leftovers home. You also can learn a lot about food preservation, especially if you have a garden. We have a food preservation course at Rutgers that you can take if you're interested. And you also can think about, feeding your, plants by using a backyard composter. So as I mentioned, I will share all of these great resources with you in an email at the end of this session. But let's talk about schools. So both the United States Department of Agriculture and the New Jersey government has really focused on food waste in schools because it has a huge impact on our food waste amount that we produce, as well as a possible place to do a lot of solutions, great solutions. And so there are great resources that I'm going to share with you on what you can do, but I summarized some of them here. And so some things we'll talk about are conducting a food waste audit, in your school, educating students and staff about the issue, starting your own share table to donate extra food, and raising funds for a composter. So we can't change what we don't measure, right? And so just by measuring how much food waste you produce in your cafeteria can help you understand what you can do to reduce it. And so we have helped schools all across the state, including Long Branch, do food waste audits to assess how much food they've wasted and which kinds of foods they're wasting. There are a lot of resources that I'll share with you on how to do food waste audits. And at Rutgers Cooperative Extension, we're always happy to help walk you through it and even do a training for folks who are interested. The first step you want to do is find a club or class that is interested, and then connect with us to see how we can help you. Another idea is to spread the word. And so you can become a food waste warrior. The World Wildlife Fund creates a food waste warrior toolkit that's broken up into different class education programs. And so you can either include a food waste lesson in your class, or you can read and learn one of the lessons and teach it to younger students, be kind of like a peer educator, I guess, speak in one of your elementary schools or middle schools and kind of help them learn about food waste and what they can do to reduce waste. And then of course, we want to share the wealth. And so what I mentioned in the EPA hierarchy, the second thing that you can do to help reduce waste is, feed hungry people. And so there are lots of ways to do share tables, and we're happy to share some of the resources on how to do them. But basically, you want to find a way to collect food at the end of lunch that is non-perishable. That means it's not like a sandwich or the pasta that was cooked. It has to be something that can't be that wasn't touched and can't go bad if it wasn't refrigerated. And then you want to work with your local food pantry to donate some of that food. And so this is a picture of a school in New Brunswick that they purchased a small fridge, and were able to work with Elijah's Promise, which is a food pantry across the street from them, to donate some of the excess food to the pantry. And then finally, improving your school garden soil. And so composting is still always a good idea, especially if you've done all the other things on education and sharing food and kind of doing the audits. And so you can, work with your school to raise funds to purchase a composter. And composters are great, especially if you have a community garden or a school garden in your school, where you can actually augment some of the soil that is in your garden with this beautiful nutrient-rich soil that's coming from the food that you've thrown out, instead of throwing it out, fertilizing your soil. So I will provide lots of great resources on food waste reduction and some of the strategies that we talked about in school. So the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection has guidelines, which I'll share And Rutgers Cooperative Extension also created some guidelines toolkit, which I'll share to help answer any questions. And if you need a little background research on some of this work, especially on like how much food waste we produce or some of the solutions we have in different sectors, I also have lots of great resources that I can share with you if you're interested. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and ask at this point what questions you have.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. So if you have questions for Sarah, please put them in the chat. I'll get to sharing just a little bit about what is coming up, and then hopefully we'll have some questions in the chat when that is completed. Yeah, we hope.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
My name's Renee Hayter. I work at Sustainable Jersey. One of the questions that we get, Sarah, a lot from schools is, you know, what are the liabilities associated with sending their food to the food pantry? And I know that you teach a course that addresses that, right?
Yeah, so we actually just created a brand new course for health inspectors to talk about liability protections. So New Jersey actually does a really great job of protecting people from donating food in good faith. So as long as you're doing what you can to make sure that the food is safe, keeping it refrigerated if it needs to be refrigerated, keeping it off the ground, keeping it away from pests, things like that, then you are not liable for anyone who gets sick from eating that food. And New Jersey actually has an additional liability protection where you can donate, you know, food that is past its best by, use by, or sell by date, which is not common in other states. And so you can actually donate food that is past its sell by date. And so I have a fact sheet that I will share along with a lot of these great resources in an email I'll send you. We also have a food waste team website that I'll share right here in the chat for everyone to take a look at. And then under the health inspector training, you'll see some of the legal fact sheets that we worked with Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic to develop. And so we looked at what currently is available in New Jersey, the legislation around food waste protection, and we created kind of legal fact sheets for people to use.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I believe Renee put in the chat, there is an open grant cycle right now. So applications are due March 11th, and that's for the Sustainable Jersey for Schools. And it's important to note that you don't have to be certified, but you do have to be registered for Sustainable Jersey for Schools in order to apply for that grant. So I'm going to share a little bit about what's coming up next for the climate challenge. And like I said before, if you still have any other questions about this presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. This is the upcoming student sessions, which we only have one coming up now, which is really great. So it'll be kind of improving on or working off of this one, right? So it's all about composting. So we'll get more in depth with how to do composting at your school or at home. And then we have one more PD session coming up about protecting New Jersey's habitats through student action. That's hosted by New Jersey Audubon. And you can see, you know, just like these all have recordings. All of these are listed on our YouTube playlist as well as on the website. You can find them at that bit.ly link that we shared before. And this is some other resources that you'll find on that same website. So we have a teacher guide that, you know, helps teachers guide their students through completing the project. We also have a student guide that is more tailored towards students. Then we have some general information like official rules. Hi, everyone. I'm not sure when I cut out.
Yes, you're on just going over the recordings and then talking about other resources.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, my internet needs to be fixed, it seems. Yeah, so this is just all the resources that we have at that bit.ly link, which is just a link to our website. Teachers, be aware that you do have to, sorry. All right, so you don't have to register. Registration doesn't mean that you have to turn in a project, I mean, but it is important for you to register. We can send out all of these great resources that Sarah just mentioned in her presentation and other resources that come down the pipe, as well as any like rule changes or anything like that. So make sure you register. You can find the registration link at that bit.ly link as well. And this is just a bunch of, our socials and our email to kind of stay in touch with us. If you do have a smartphone with you, you can use this QR code to direct you right to that link that is connected to the bit.ly, which is just our website. If you want to reach us personally with any questions, you can reach out at njstudentclimatechallenge@sustainablejersey.com. If you're posting anything related to the challenge on social media, please use the hashtag #NJStudentClimateChallenge. That way we can kind of keep up with what you're doing and share it on our networks as well. But yes, I don't think we have any other questions. So
There is a question in the chat.
I
from
must have
Lee
missed it.
Larson. Yeah. So it says, how would being a vegetarian or eating less meat help?
Thank you so much, Leah, for your question. So it definitely does help when we talk about like climate change and carbon footprint for eating more plant-based foods. But for food waste, unfortunately, if you I can kind of share my screen again. If you take a look at how much we waste, sorry, I don't want to make you dizzy, but I'll go back to that one, table. Most of the food waste we waste are those produce, fruits and vegetables and grains, right? So they're not necessarily the meat products. So from a food waste perspective, just making sure that we eat what we purchase, making sure that we're planning better is really important. But from a climate change perspective, there's definitely something to be said about eating more whole plant-based foods, right? Not super processed plant-based foods, because those also take a lot of energy to make.
Right. It's all about the energy used to, raise the meat products and then process them and then get them to the market. So it's all about the energy, how much energy it takes to kind of create and get a steak on your table versus a salad on your table or broccoli or things like that. So there's a lot of emissions associated with meat production and distribution.
Yeah. And then your question about eating local, absolutely. Eating local does definitely help more with carbon emissions, like we were talking about before, right? So not having to transport it across the country or around the world, and eating more kind of, like regionally or locally can help reduce some of that transportation, energy. But again, from a food waste perspective, it just really is about making sure that you're eating what you're purchasing, and that, that'll definitely reduce the carbon emissions and the methane emissions created from that food waste. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you so much. I am actually going to use a lot of this information at home because I have a lot of trouble remembering, especially the leftovers, right? That they're in the fridge. I know my mom just reminded me today that I had this like couscous salad and I'm like, okay, that's for lunch now. I forgot about that. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. And we hope to see you at our last student session and our last PD session coming up. So thank you and have a great day.